Rablikshi Nidegem Padi Sangeshe Do Miteo Idrokunamda Shinla Chupa Shoidam Guru Ratnamandala Gandhiyataya
Sanji Chodam
Sogi
Sogi
Chonam La Chanchu Bardu Dani Kyamsun Dagi Chishe Gibe Tsonan Drola Binche Sangi Parasho
Sanji Chodam
Sogi
Sogi
Chonam La Chanchu Bardu Dani Kyamsun Dagi Chishe Gibe Tsonan Drola Binche Sangi
Parasho Sanji
Chodam Sogi Chonam La Chanchu Bardu Dani Kyamsun Dagi Chishe Gibe Tsonan Drola Binche
Sanji Parasho Kangi tuzini zone tawa tamje pambi chere tambi chun tunze kodam kela changse lo. Good morning, everyone. Namaste. कैसा है? Yang kazi 참디 da 지난 참디 니바 현진진기 폐유 삼비권에 냠술랑샤 땜바드레.
Ingrid.
Yeah.
So, good morning, everyone. We're going to start the session today with mind training like the rays of the sun, which is a text that we've been looking at for the last few weeks. So today we're going to pick up from the following section. Let's look at the text. What is to be put into practice through contemplating the advantages of concern for others. Thank you. So for those of you who have the book, it's in page 52. Thank you.
Tadinza karswada shen jinzi chidang shen jinzi che goyagi an samaloga ran devan duguyor dungan duguyor marta thi chiwondige lo hengila yobate susu deva devatang susu dungam devati susu kasantangan lo hengila yobachi and dili tosho sorojilaya samlo tangore slaundi and kabkalaya chiklo mashon adosh tende yong sigros lagdun de chikpe ani tachi mission ki nyopche ta tindi ton kanga chedevajina tashi shenchevan zingore slavana lamsan duzu chiklo la chade adojta madeva tindi tende yong sigdo kawres.
So when this section is teaching how to develop concern for others, or more specifically, a sense of cherishing others, we begin with recognizing that all of us are seeking happiness and well-being, and none of us wants to experience suffering. Innately, we're seeking happiness, so we want to avoid suffering. And when we then shift the focus to others and develop an attitude of cherishing others, it might seem to be a bit opposite to what we're actually seeking. So we're seeking our own happiness and well-being, but here this section is teaching how to develop concern for others. So sometimes we find it difficult to comprehend how to get what we want, happiness and well-being, and to avoid suffering, while shifting our attitude towards cherishing other living beings, and even more so when we experience problems created by others, then it makes it even more difficult to cherish others.
어디다 이내야 먼저 롤행기를 여대하게 비랑 제번진데야 랑 대원 되대하게 원리 지 아니 대원 센테 인치 용야디 진징 상로 디기 시치메바 아니 랑 진징 상로 디 시치메바 아니 신진징 상로 디기 실샤네 아니 타두 대와 용당디 디송도 스라 디송고 연자 아니 신진징기 상로디 안간주 베랭기라야 대원 대바다 둥가 문제비 상로 여바 디기 답에 아니 갭팅 쪼디 아니 신진징기 상로지 여바이나 아니 소수군 되된 낭신지 드베 여바디 비기 따지 시에샤오 마임바 아니 라렌 따니 아니 뇽의 트브딩이 따지 산지 좀 된디니 쯧비기 혼기 끼었다 뭐 사물로기 뇽의 트바인사 아니 간줄라야 람된 아샤와치 디차위엔자 아니 개침부 친 송대야디 디레샤스라.
We might think, how then do I come to cherish others if they're creating problems for me? So as we said, innately we're seeking happiness and well-being. We're innately also cherishing ourselves. But then if we're looking for genuine, authentic kind of happiness, an authentic or genuine kind of happiness does not depend upon or is not supported by an attitude of cherishing others, of cherishing oneself. But really, if we want to find happiness and well-being, a consummate happiness and well-being, it is found through cherishing other living beings. Our happiness and well-being are supported by an attitude of cherishing others. And therefore, when we think of our basic wish to be happy and to be well, to avoid suffering and pain, then if we want to be smart about the way that we pursue that, then we should cherish other living beings. And this is something that is not only stated, but we can also start to sense that through a personal experience. Even more so when we look at those who taught how to develop an attitude of cherishing others in exchange of cherishing oneself. Then the Buddha, the Bhagavan, the great masters of the past, based upon their own experience, taught those ways of accomplishing consummate happiness and well-being, supported by an attitude of cherishing others.
samlo lojong pigi ta namchu dembige shenjin zingi samlo yongya la ya ani ranjin zingi kyon thong ko ya chik ro di yongdos penta ombun nombu pigi ta shenjin zeng ta nyinji chanju gu semke dang rimba de xiang di an di thoma de la ya ranjin zingi kyon thong zu ranjin zingi kyon thong wa che wala ya ani chik So
developing an attitude of cherishing others is a smart way of accomplishing our own happiness and well-being. So in order to do so, we also need to see the faults in our own self-cherishing attitude. We need to see the problems with the self-cherishing attitude that we have. And this is the way that sharp faculty practitioners practice. So those that are of sharp faculties who practice bodhicitta, which is rooted in great compassion, they first of all start with looking at the drawbacks of cherishing oneself. They look at the drawbacks of cherishing ourselves, why we need to cherish others. They also contemplate or comprehend selflessness, and on that basis they develop an attitude of cherishing others.
This is the Junzen Karis Laundi Pig Shen Chevan Zinsu di Shenla Mibi, the Ninji Ki to the Reshas. The Shenla Mibi Ninji Ki on the Junzen Zu Karisam Tangos Landi, Chadam Monsong Shan to Kurdingi, Randa Shen Samolo, the Chadam Monsong Shan to Kurni, 아니 랑다 셴레 네버 치엘라 소바 랭에버 사일라 소바 아니 지케원 딜레이나 타만티고 용야 케워 치만 남수이네 난손 men타메버 예기 규디 차담 몬송 토니 지건자 다 디기 샤원디 규딩이기 안지 소처 요토 졸라미니다 강다 삼성기 인지디 아니 기고도스라 디케반다 젠진진 상로 초도 교와 트레셔 딩고연데서 비기 차담 몬송기 샤원디 규딩이 순르진 바이네 드라이네다 니인난다 파르마인난다 차담 몬송기 샤원디 규르스비 젤야 아니 지 가서 다시 팬도 영행기 장시 니걸라야 지 팬디 두야기 남주 베들라 두건자 다 딘틸라야 닌지기요 바시로 수술라 내가 지 수술라야 지 마롱아지 자주 마롱아지 제와 닌지 임바이네야 코디 차담 몬송기 샤원디 규니 대체바라 삼성기 삼로디 아니 똑투바이나 야자 야탐박 지 콘로키야라 소바다 마가와 키야 삼로디 장신기 마 시드야지 용구여서레스
So through an attitude of cherishing others, we also develop compassion to others. We develop compassion to other living beings in recognizing how other living beings are controlled by afflictive states of mind, by anger, but by attachment, by ignorance. Not only other living beings, but also we. So we ourselves and others are controlled by those afflictive states of mind. And on that basis, we create negative actions. We create problems for others. We create situations in which things do not work for us well in this life. And likewise, they bring about all sorts of ruination in future lifetimes and beyond. We end up in miserable states of existence. So we experience problems here and hereafter on the basis of being under the control of our afflictive states of mind. And this is the basis for generating compassion. We recognize how we and other living beings are controlled by afflictive states of mind. And therefore, whoever is controlled by afflictive states of mind, who ends up performing actions that result in suffering here and hereafter, is an object of compassion. All those living beings are controlled by afflictions. So even more so when we think of someone that is creating problems for us, not only friends, but also enemies, those that are creating problems for us, those that are behaving inappropriately, we think of them as those who are controlled by afflictive states of mind. So we think, alas, that person behaves in that way because they are controlled by anger, attachment, and ignorance. So naturally, they end up behaving in this way because of the control of those afflictive states of mind. So if you think about it like that, also naturally, your sense of anger and so forth will be diminished. Our afflictions will abate once we recognize how sentient beings are controlled by afflictive states of mind that cause them to behave in a particular way. And this is the basis for developing compassion.
depend on sosulai pejawaina ji sosugi shinsendu depend rongumar samgi samlo de ji shinsendu ani chajje marabdi chigmaras tara chigmaras di ta mishibe wangi ani sosuyana nondu shodroya ra ani dindi yunguda dinza ani shengi chajje diam chajje marabdi pigigi ani mariwa ani decha 아니 셰단 소바 간지 간지 로 마롱 요초디 슈치비 왕기 로디 온도 소니 아니 자주들이 슈기여버디 야자야다 말이스 딘즈 딘디 닐루디 삼투바이나 아니 자주 디기 샤원디 큐드ring인기 아니 미난다 토도이난다 텔야 콘도 사사마로스 로 사사마로스 페나 미치기 nganzulaya chik menda kin teon korang gyalolaya chik menda kidenge mi sumji kerangi injimi gyun mi bigi segurslana dünle yongeng mi dela nganzo kontrasama ku gyalola ko kayo mar mi mambuji ko bigi ni iye de yon chok samani teyon gorada ro to the mendajin teyon da di dünle yongeng mi di ta sosu solo to ta mache ranche sores dinzen dünle yongeng de nganzo 아니 딘디 상로지 담아는 뒤에 그 니지 콜 카요 말 상성들 람상 껴야기 상로디 그 갸중 디소 방 고토 지야기 상로지 콜사라서 디난제로지 간지 차다 모습 기페 대용원자 아니 미티 디샹와디 켜대요원자 아니 탑시 매주를 딘디 상로지 땅투 바이나 아니 닌지 셴레 닌지 깨고를 세디 그 균세 여버지 차그도 왔으라.
So when we think about it with respect to ourselves, we come to abstain from negative behavior, from inappropriate way of behaving when we understand how, what constitute negative actions, how do we behave in a negative way. So we would not be behaving in a negative way had we known what constitutes a negative way of behaving. But sometimes because of ignorance, because of not understanding, we end up making mistakes. And it's the same thing for others as well. When they are controlled by ignorance, when they are controlled by anger, when attachment arises, they end up behaving inappropriately. And particularly when you think of those afflictive states of mind, gaining control, getting power, being very forceful, certainly some will be behaving in a negative way through the force of such powerful afflictive states of mind. So when we recognize that, either with respect to other living beings, other people, other even animals and so forth, we recognize that they behave in a negative way, in an inappropriate way, because they are controlled by afflictive states of mind. We don't get angry at them because we understand that they are under the control of afflictive states of mind. It's like, in some sense, if we think of an analogy to that, suppose that a person holding a gun is approaching, pointing the gun at you, but behind them there are two other people pointing their guns at that person and saying that unless you're going to shoot, we're going to shoot you, right? So unless you're going to kill the other person, we're going to kill you. So who are we going to get angry with? Actually, the person is probably fearing for their life. They have no choice. They have no opportunity, you might say. The real perpetrators are those behind, those who are holding the guns behind. So similarly, when we think of how other living beings end up behaving badly in a harmful way, well, the ones that are propelling that behavior, the ones that are holding the gun, so to speak, are afflictive states of mind. Now, they're afflictive states of mind, anger, attachment, and so forth. So rather than getting angry with those people, we should have compassion for them because they're not behaving in that way and having control. They're controlled by afflictive states of mind.
lakbashuk chenpo gyavne shindong di shini shindong di yaga sam susu gola shubay na pi yaga dela tangone mi kase tachik samlo yongi jibay na shingi yaga dela kongro sag marasta kase di yaga di soju maral lakba yu jini yaga sali susu gola teri da di chigni lakbe genjin yaga sari 아니 야가드 사회칼에 수수 골 태든 수수기 레지기 또기 체버리 딘자 다 비기게 무스 태기 야가들이야 신기 야가들이야 콘트로사사 네코라면도 왔지 그러 디난신 소로지기 아니 미지 차당기 상황도 결제네 자중에 받치 아니 디 자중에 받칭인디 수수의 체원디 아니 수수다 비기게 Dia susu lejik to yikta cheba imbadi Geshe these the dintichi imbadi ani ratreba ina ani kondro sasach pigilaya maga vayonsachi megyo soraj ro one the transandana zawni megyo chagdos ro.
So if you think about it again using another analogy, suppose that there is a strong gale that passes through a forest and a branch breaks and falls on your head. So you're hit on your head by a branch and it's painful. So you're going to get angry with the branch. Well, it is, you can say that, it's not, the branch did not have a choice. It was a strong wind that caused that branch to fall down. And also, on top of that, you yourself have created the karma in order for that experience of being hit by a branch to occur. So the actual thing, the direct thing that was hitting you in the head is the branch, but still, we don't really get angry with the branch, right? There's no point in getting angry with that branch. So similarly, when we think of someone behaving in a negative way, and particularly when we encounter those that behave in a negative way, we think of what is the thing that controls that negative behavior. They behave in a harmful way because of being under the control of afflictive states of mind, but also if you're affected by it, it means that also you yourself have created the karma to experience that situation. And therefore, rather than getting furious or angry at that person, rather than developing a sense of dislike towards that person, we keep in mind that they're behaving that way because they are under the control of afflictive states of mind. They are the perpetrators, but also we also have created the karma. We have created or accumulated the karma to experience that situation.
아니 견 통고 그래서 다 마리비 견 통야라야 마리비 진탕 가리 바디 다 사운드 타투고 타야디 마리비게 당진 마리비게 진탕 가이 바디 사운당고 도스 다디 땅발라야 아니 통마델야 다 메비게 다 메바세티 로 마리비게 단진당 무슨 가비게 로디 and dame to be sheriff is dame to be sheriff dame of Congress dame of Gomiala make you daddy any pig touching Maribin Zimbana Jingi make you daddy Munzin Chevadi Pay Massive Kishimo Sanji shown Sanji Chamden Digi choose on the Tamjelo teacher the incident and the Jassichim surely Dom Yasha you dichagon to us.
And the root of all the harm that we experience are afflictive states of mind, anger, attachment, and ignorance. So we need to see the faults of those afflictive states of mind. We need to see how faulty anger is, how faulty attachment is, and that the root of those afflictive states of mind, the basis of them is ignorance. So it's crucial that we also recognize that, and particularly it is so important to recognize ignorance. So as I said, first of all, what is ignorance? And what is the mode of apprehension of ignorance? What is the way that ignorance operates? Does the object of ignorance exist? When we see that what ignorance apprehends in the sense of what is the object of the mode of apprehension is of ignorance, and we see that it doesn't exist, that would mean that we develop wisdom that realizes selflessness. But we realize that the self is adhered to by ignorance does not exist. So it's so important to develop this wisdom that realizes the absence of the self, to realize selflessness, to recognize selflessness. And in some sense, we can say that this is the summation of all the teachings that the Buddha gave us. Just as Shantideva said at the beginning of the 9th chapter of his Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, all the previous branches were taught for the sake of generating wisdom.
당진 telaya da kandas chagi megi ani nyamshut ro ani shuchigo dos da di je kab yakshu ro di pe jinzi shukchim yong kabdulaya ngal chik chemaso ngal chik ne son samson so ro ji pi te ngal ngau nyambi lo shukchim yong kabduti ani kokob yakshu ditsigi yores. The Diti Kabdulaya, and nga khandas nangdu nga khadu nga khandredu segi ani shimju chechinero nga yos shimju chedi tak kokop sanamdu tadi takji chegi tuzuro di pe renshuro di ani sungdus.
And particularly when we look at this combination of a self-cherishing attitude and a self-grasping attitude, in certain situations, we get the opportunity to look deeply into that sense of self and ask ourselves, what is this type of self? What is the makeup of the self as adhered to by an attitude of self-grasping? So, for example, we experience a certain situation when someone is harming us, is treating us in a way that is not fair, not right, and so forth. And we feel very strongly about it. And there's a strong sense of self that arises in that point. They shouldn't treat me in this way. They shouldn't do this to me. Why didn't doing this to me, and so forth. So there's a strong sense of self that arises at that time in our mind. And this is the best opportunity to investigate that sense of self that arises in our mind. So where is it? Where is the self? In what way does it exist when there's this strong sense of self that arises in our mind? Where is it? So those opportunities actually in which we are being harmed, we are being mistreated and so forth, give us this very good opportunity. This is the time actually to investigate the sense of self that arises in our mind.
디치 나오 냠비 로델야 나디 베기 직 아니 라완드 직 수칸야 마데보 코란 베기 유디니 직 아니 다 도도타위 직 예비 딘디게 아니 남수 슈크챵보 슈직 다 여탁저레스 다 디기 라완드 여바타오티 다 가시 다디 디차고다 디디기 라완드 여다 메세티 딘디기 수칸야 마데비 코랑문이 트비 나지 아니 다 예메디다 따고 그랬어 다 디다 젤니 니긴 도문도 개지기 유딘이 트바치 여바이나 젤니 니고 그러왔어 그러 유딘이 변의 쪽진이나 지 여슬라나 디간이 지 여슬라바이나 아니 디간이 젤니 니고 그러다 다 디간이 여슬라야 디간이 젤니 니에메나 디간이 메바디 야시 야단 바라was tinza ata ngadi rang nguni chubata 이 남비 ngadi 아니 세사기 시디 아니 다시 품문가디 레마도 딜리게는 로사스키요 말이스 이제 다시 품문가디 띵이야 아니 비 차시소소네 세니 아니 ngadi 요마요 아니 실주 현재 지원이 자원이니 아니 죽죽사직 다 자금 말아봐야나 sen mani ve soroji chagora sro ta tinti levi khadula tini ngal chinde sambi gi nganzin di shukchon royach an di shukchon yutab gi di thambi gi ani ji dasha shukchon roya ani ngarge shukchon roya khondro shukchon roya imbadi gyasi gyata mare sro.
So there's that sense of I that arises in our mind in those situations. And when we investigate, when we look at that sense of self that arises in those situations in our mind, we see that it appears as if it is an independent sense of self. It does not depend upon anything else. It exists objectively, as if there is this lamp, this concrete sense of self that arises in our mind in those situations. So we investigate that. We check that and ask ourselves, does it exist? Can I find it? If I look for it, can it be found? And where we look for that self is what we call the basis of designation, the five aggregates, the body and mind. So if that concrete sense of self, this I, independent self, objective self exists, it needs to be found, amongst the five aggregates. It's like, for example, if there's something, if something exists and it needs to be on the table, then where we look for that thing is on the table. So we look everywhere on this table, and if it doesn't, we cannot find it, it's not there, then we can surmise that therefore it does not exist on the table. So similarly, when we look for an objective self, an independent self, a self that exists from its own side. The place that we should look for it is what we call the basis of designation of the self, the five aggregates, the body and mind. So if a concrete sense of self exists, it needs to be found there. So we look for it, and we say that we cannot find it upon our analysis and investigation. And when we say that this independent sense of self cannot be found and therefore it does not exist, an objective self, an independent self does not exist, then naturally our self-grasping attitude diminishes, but also the afflictions that are supported on this sense of self lose the power. So anger and attachment and pride and so forth, 100% will lose their force when the basis for those afflictive states of mind, this self-grasping attitude, will diminish.
that kanji ani chadang gi lodi kazu shukchon roba ti tsugi ani semlaya shide pakbevti yunguyores tinzada kanji ani shenchinzin seg samlo di shenchinzin seg samlo di ani pigi gi kalsoda tiredos pena dunga gyoda chebale thona sambigi samba tiredos ro ta dunga gi tsawa chadang monsong kanji chadang monsong shichibigita 아니 동아 친디 총종 간도즈는 대탐질다 아니 단의 지마로 냠비 somebody 젠진제레스 다 딘티치 여바이나 아니 데니 샘디 야지야담바 차당기 갑딜라 드고요레 디즈 란싱기 시대용야지 자와디 젠진제가 삼로레세디 samlutana rathe yuji chagores.
And when our anger and attachment diminish, then certainly there is a greater sense of peace and well-being that we experience. So with with an attitude of cherishing others, it also works in a similar way. So we recognize that other living beings are under the control of suffering and the causes of suffering. And we wish them to be free from suffering and their causes. May they be free from suffering and their causes. The causes for suffering, the basis for the suffering that sentient beings experience are anger and attachment. So when we wish them to be free from suffering and the cause of suffering, we wish them to be free from what constitutes the foundation, the basis for suffering, anger and attachment. So when we cherish other living beings, other sentient beings, we wish them to be free from suffering and from afflictive states of mind. And if we develop this other cherishing attitude, it will also oppose our own anger, attachment, and so forth. And naturally, when it opposes our own anger and attachment, we gain a greater degree of peace and well-being. Our mind becomes more peaceful. So if you think about it, Geshe reckons that you'd be able to see that point. You'd be able to recognize how, through developing an attitude of cherishing others, our own anger and attachment will abate. And through that, we will experience a greater degree of peacefulness and happiness.
There is that Shenjinzing Samlo Senamandu Shenjinzing Gombi Kabdulaya, Shenjinzing Gombi Kabdulaya, so de Chagdangi Kenta. 아니 차당기 샤만디 규딩이 다 차당기 떡기 아니 겐체야디 란다신 슬레야 겐체야디 아니 웅기 레기 샤비 바샤기 떡기 아니 딩인 테벌 때니 동아 연구여비 네수디 야자야담 레마도지 겐 큐니메바 겐 큐니메바 제부동안 좀 미시바라스 딘자 어디디기 상로지 담바이나 다지 강한 TV 갑들이야 아니 다 아니 디 떡기 아니 개왕 한만 남수 샤비 아니 미기위기 바차 아니 기 남미 다 용조보다 지 떡기 아니 세버쇼 삼성기 라 다 세트고요 다 야지야다마 인자 아니 세트고요 바디 무은짐비 돈지 조나 가고고야 어딘지 돈은 들어봐야나 간지 아니 소수 샘디 기우차고레스로 다 조취제 조등에서 주지에 조디 생파부 용약체 디레도스
When we meditate on an attitude of cherishing others, we come to see the faults of anger and attachment. We understand that in certain situations when we experience problems and sufferings, they are conditioned by anger and attachment, in that a certain situation is a reason. Our anger and attachment acted as conditions, as powers, forces that activated karma that we have created in the past. And they've resulted in experiences of suffering. Without such conditions playing out, it would be impossible to experience suffering. So the suffering that we experience, the problems that we experience, whatever arises for us, arises through those forces of conditions and karma that we've accumulated in the past. Conditions are afflictive states of mind, anger, and attachment, and the imprints of non-virtuous actions that we have created in the past. We've created them in previous lifetimes, in this lifetime and in previous lifetimes. So then when we develop an attitude of cherishing others, we take into consideration this process, and we then wish for all living beings to be free from the maturation of karma, the imprints of karma that create those situations, scenarios of suffering and pain. And the more we cultivate this well-wishing attitude to others, wishing them to be free from the maturation of such negative actions, our mind is made happier. There's a greater sense of joy that springs up in our mind, and this is very precious. And the more we do it, the more our mind becomes peaceful and relaxed. And when we think of what is the essence of a Dharma practice, what it really means to practice the Dharma, what it means is to make a mind more relaxed, more happy. So we use such methods of developing an attitude of cherishing others also as ways in order to find more mental happiness, mental peace.
아니 samlo khar tamba ina ya phi ta chik nama sanji bi ani chela ya drogmudas kyam dru sambad mena nambi gi the koran la ya suyo mares ro ani chik kyam tembo bo ani sanji gi kati kyam phi ta chik golong gi bi ani chu konjo gi yonde ani kyam tribi daro ani gendeng konjo gi ta chik ani yonde mo kati tembo la soba du chini 아니 가드이나 꺄므르디 엔 야부시 상당고에 백해청으로스 아주 꺄므르라브자 나노라야 지시 펀초 따도 쳐봐 풀세티 로 비게 곰냐는 집이 갑다 예바치 팀 마스치 사돈 론조 가르쳐봐 있느냐 디캅둘라야 꺄비 콘조스 쟁고레세티 로 쟁바쌈마스 델라야 아니 치 푸그 쳐봐디 담보디 telaya chik buigi ani meba chigores kechembo shuj sonyores ra.
And the principal force behind this practice should also be for us as Buddhists, the refuge that we take in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, taking refuge in the three precious gems. For without going for refuge, whatever we practice is not going to be a Buddhist practice. Our practice is regarded as Buddhist practice if it is motivated or based on going for refuge. When we go for refuge, you can say that we enter into the ranks of Buddhists, and without going for refuge, we are not Buddhists. So it's important then to make sure that when we put it into practice, we base it mainly on going for refuge. We go for refuge to the Buddha, the teacher. We go for refuge to the Dhamma, which is the actual refuge. The actual refuge for us are true paths and true cessations. And we also go for refuge to the Sangha, the community of the supportive community, the community that assists us in accomplishing this virtue. And when we go for refuge, we do so through reflecting on the good qualities of the objects of refuge, remembering the kindness of the objects of refuge. So at least for us as Buddhist practitioners, it's important to make sure that we think of refuge, that we think of the qualities of the objects of refuge, that we appreciate the kindness of the objects of refuge in our practice. And not only when we actually sit for a meditation session, but also in other activities, even as far as when we eat something or when we drink something, we reflect upon the three objects of refuge and we make offering to them. So not only when we start to have a food, a meal, we need to remember the three jewels, but also we need also from the bottom of our heart to make offerings to the three objects of refuge. So such practices are regarded as very important for Buddhists.
These are same thing. Kunjo tembi sound jobana, kunjo can Samsung, Lama kunjo sung can Samsung. She thing me yobayana, and gaman parchena, nyon dress. And Chava Landro, how don't the chick to some consum with Chava to so back, and Tarshimba Yonyagi, the Sosa Drubjan Senamundu, Shabram Senamundu, Yakshu di, and Gamdro Gomiati. Chagores, numbers chicken savagilaya, and chick shabram yakshu di, any camdro comiat, cavu saltavia, any camdro sayati, yashures, and cosun to denchik tiwainaya, thank it so di, and Tamakadin chinkitachi, Koyanadra, Timana, Kobarchima, Timana chick sensam piglia, and what dindrichi injimi gores in the Jaurum chicita, to tout, songuto asra.
And as we go for refuge, we generate that as a heartfelt going for refuge. We think of those objects of refuge and we think, please consider me. In Tibetan, we say Lama Kien or Kuncho Kien, which means, please think of me, keep me in your mind. So as we develop this attitude, we reduce the obstacles that we have for the cultivation of virtue, which means that if we reduce the obstacles for virtue, we also find more success in our practice of virtue. We're able on that basis to bring our practice of virtue to completion. That is based upon the refuge that we take, right? So refuge is the very beginning of the stages by which we put things into practice. And as we go for refuge, we can also use things that for us are representations of the qualities of body, speech, and mind of such objects of refuge. So for example, what for us is a representation and embodiment of the qualities of body is, for example, a Buddha statue, a Buddha image, or if you don't have them, then you can at least think about it when you recite the name of the Buddha, or when you kind of utter the name of the Buddha. So it's important to also, for us as Buddhists, to make sure that we use those things in order to assist our practice of going for refuge. His Holiness Dalai Lama has emphasized it before, how it is important also to make sure that we relate to those things, to those objects, as ways of making sure that we create the right attitude. Like, for example, the attitude that we take when we go for refuge.
There is a good matuna yon chorada, Kubar Marana yon chorda, Shoka was the bench the Ragrasra, T gave piggy, then big change it, so the teacher, and Daranshan, Delia Chopina, Yatsa Jatamba, same thing, Teba Yobana, and it's Kunda Piggy, Rita was Shanchi, Chopa Mapin Shazan, the Rita was Redos. Kanji di and change teaching, Democratic change tea, Shoji Galaya, this was to be Satsan Sajilasha, Titan Chobaji Piwania, Temple Cardincelaya, most Choba Piada, Kebameva, the Gatchet Yatamares, draw.
So then it is possible, for example, that we don't have a Buddha statue, that we don't have a Buddha image like a tanka or a photo and so forth. What we can do, for example, is just to write down the name of a Buddha, the Buddha. it's not that hard to find a pen and a paper, right? So think about it as using something, to remind you of the qualities of body, speech, mind of Buddha. So you write down the name of the Buddha, you use that paper, you make offerings in front of that. You think of the qualities of the Buddha. So if you're able to do that, then certainly 100% certain that there is no difference between making offerings in this way than to making offerings to a real Buddha, to an actual Buddha.
Tere nge ge sarkashi shunzaisa tanda anzuta ju pegi shashoki ene trawa gelong logubchu kodang simdengi chiki ni na songudoro pegi kyamdro sashos namu gurube namu bada namu sangaya say kyamdro di kyaran ya chungne chakbo tindri yongi imbayna kyaran kyamdro di mbumnga sada gyacha gyatamba nedi segris kogi labtugis ya mituni 아니 참에 진 만드나 아니 비봄가사 나사타 다디스 삼네 샤자바나 나사 출레 년가 요레스 다디니 아니 니마타고 비기다 지 친구를 직사와나 두 순문든 사다 아니 로고주 거란체모 겔론디기 코 야차 야타마 사이겔 투기스 어디리 송고도 야차 야타마 간지 아니 난주 댄스 쪼디 아니 지피기게 자비군조숨 로 교육군 줬음들이스. 또 디르다 산지기 추 쟁인지 추 원의 쟁인지만은 교육군 줬음이야. 타치도 이체고도. 디여비터는 그냥 겸르스는 줘봐야나. parçayna di doğru sosa dövjayna tel den legri ani chi gom nyamne chinginjina lamdro tel den yungres ani choju javase de chibigi ani chalawina ya di güni yonya so semla ya di kasi ya da winsares ro dinganzu shushu matuga kiyo marwas ro.
Geshe was listening to an advice given by an elderly monk from Eastern Tibet. He was in his 80s or 90s. Gupchu Gotang. Yeah, in his 90s, and he said that if you recite the formula for going for refuge, Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dhammaya, Namo Sanghaya, if you recite it regularly, if you accumulate those recitations, if you end up doing, let's say, 500,000 recitations, certainly you can overcome certain situations that you experience. Like, for example, if you persist in such a practice and you're sick or you have a certain medical condition, then certainly it can be overcome using such recitation. So suppose that your attitude is such that you take up a practice like that. You do 500,000 recitations of this formula, and at the end you recover from whatever sickness you have, and then you think that I've got what I wanted, now I don't need to do it anymore. Well, certainly it can really, it can relapse in the future. So then thinking what it is for us, well, what a Buddhist practice is for us as Buddhists, a Buddhist practice is for us is based on, first of all, going for refuge to the three objects of refuge. And we also need to develop the trust that for us, if we're seeking protection from suffering and the causes for suffering, the real protection will be afforded by these objects of refuge. So when we then go for refuge, we overcome obstacles for virtue. We accumulate the collections, we purify negativities and obscurations. Whatever we meditate upon is based on that going for refuge, and through that also we receive the blessings of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions. So at least for us as Buddhists, when we think about it, Geshe reckons that we say that actually it's not something that for us it's impossible to do. It's not that we're incapable of doing that.
아들에서 더든지 로지 다 로에다 니바 신진지 평유 삼비권의 냠슬람 자 템바니스 콘라카든시오 곰시송데스.
Anyway, keeping that in mind, let's look at what the text says. So again, we're looking at mind training like the rays of the sun. And when the section that says what is to be put into practice through contemplating the advantages of concern for others or the advantages of an attitude of cherishing others, it begins with an instructions on meditating on the great kindness of all beings. Now, this line is taken from the 7-point mind training, which is the root text for mind training like the rays of the sun.
Kun la kadin cheo gom se kun se that's jik simja tham jelaya mini and jik simja tham jeti sozolaya kadin chimbu imba gom gores sungores that kadin chimbu imba that jik sin di on the chewaina and tham jelo kadin chimbu sam konata teskal khabu rojros inaya nganzu bigi ta jik namba bigi ta kewa ngashi ani kelen dingin jimba na ani jik tham jelo kadin chimbu imba di Gomya di testik le laboratory. Ro kewa hashis lawandi ani chik ten dini tsibi kewa ngama namsule ya kewa kazu silang yorslana zawa nini pegi ani chame bachi ro kewa chame bachi lang yobanza ani kewa chame ba dhirin la ya pena ta chik socha ki kewa busing ki kewa mi kewa lai kewa ta kanji ani Lai kewa chameba, mi kewa chameba, the dos kewa chameba land son yobanza, ti rilaya, kewa rilaya, mang chise kewa rilaya, mar, pigi chamjon langi, pena chiu jimbana, chiu di amati, chiu dilaya, pe chambu chigdosro, but Korang so lutani, pu so yon chiel soba, a dinti chiwar, that dinti tony, some down di, any. Rosochan digging nig mache nyonda di che nyon mar samsung zawani katsu chematuba dus chagonza tamje log mache nyomadi ani tindigita ani rigbegi choya chi yungor tindigi toni samtamana kona kaden chewa gom sedi lelawroch chagoros ra.
When this line says, meditate on the great kindness of all beings, we develop the recognition of, first of all sentient beings. All sentient beings, without exception, having been kind to us. So then when we think about it in terms of this lifetime only, when we just consider our experience in this life, it's a little bit hard to establish that all living beings, without exceptions, have been kind to us. But then when you approach it from a Buddhist perspective, in which we we believe and accept the existence of past and future lifetimes, it is somewhat easier to think of how all sentient beings have been kind to us. Particularly when you start to look at it from the perspective of having already been reborn countless times. Not only we've been reborn for countless times, also the different types of rebirth that we've already taken are of great variety, great number. We've already been born as human beings and as animals and insects in godly types of existence and so forth. So we've been born countless times in all of those states of existence, and in most of them we were born to a mother. So when we think of the great kindness that a mother extends to her own son, even as far as when you look at animal behavior, when you look at birds, for example, how they care for their offsprings, even to the point in which they are willing to give up their own life in order to protect their own offsprings, then we can also think that other living beings in past lifetimes have been so kind to me when they've acted as my mother, having protected me, having cared for me, and so forth. So if you think about it like that, Geshe reckons, if you think about it in that logical process, you will find that it's actually easy to prove or to demonstrate the kindness of sentient beings, of all sentient beings.
Rolla page Sanji Dribble shows, Sanji Chedo, Sochon Seven, Rolla page Sanji Dribble shows, Laundi, and Simjan Tamjig Chedo, Simjan Tamjig Cheduta, not Sanji go do some big. Sanji was shows and pay, pig, that chick 6 them was some moimba, same thing. Some samba namda tone, Chegoras, the Cheva some masse, one tartuni, Sanji combat toy over the killing goras. That didn't Sanji combat. Called in a Togor Slawandi, and shen pigi tachi ani draw to the ten raw mitsa mai but ani draw to the ten ani lojong ching mena sanji combat top to your maras tinza sanji combat to be ani chi ken yakshu di ani simjin kun cha de boras tinza dinji to ne kadin chembo ima gomyati songores.
So the first line in that section says, meditate on the great kindness of all. So it is important for us, first of all, as Buddhist practitioners, as practitioners of the Dharma, and even more so as Mahayana practitioners. So as Mahayana practitioners, we often begin whatever practice we undertake with the verse of refuge and bodhicitta, which is here on the screen. And the second half of the verse says, by the merits I create through listening to the teachings or practicing the Dharma, what have you, by the accumulations I gather, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Right? So the aspiration that we make is to become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. So we need to do that. We need to recite that at the beginning of a practice. But the point is not just to keep it at the level of just saying the words, but it needs to be generated as a heartfelt wish. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. It needs to be heartfelt. So we need to think that whatever I do, whatever I experience, I will use my best ability in order to become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So my attainment of Buddhahood depends upon sentient beings of the 6 rounds of existence. Without depending on other living beings, I will not be able to attain the state of Buddhahood. So my own state of Buddhahood, you can say, is conditioned. It is created by depending upon other sentient beings.
어디래셔다 레페나 산지 추조마 칸 산지 추조마 된지 샘라야지 아니 콘로 사사지다 마가사소로치 샤데바이나 아니 칸이 때야 되다 샘라 삼로니모디 아니 간다 차도고라스라 간다자다 디피기 진 간다 세야기티 렐하우드 마르다이네 야자자다 세요바치 인자 가주 투두게 아니 로종테 제바이나 간지 도 드난 탈도나 아니 소수샘이야 시딜레 고레스 라.
So we recite this verse for going for refuge and developing bodhicitta, right? And we need to make sure that we do that as a heartfelt way of going for refuge, not just saying the words, because if we say the words, if we recite this verse, but still in our heart, we dislike a certain person, we are still angry or resentful of that person, our words and heart do not agree with each other, right? Our words and mind are in disagreement. So we don't want that to happen. We want to make sure that when we recite this verse, we're doing it with the best intention from the bottom of our heart. And if we do that, if we take it up as a best training, then that engenders a peaceful state of mind.
로종 디컬이야 조 닌지 단디네마 튀어도 닌지다 잠바세디 아니 시자 차고레스 다 닌지다 잠바께서기 율티 아니 산지 찬스 샤고 마로스 라 아니 닌지다 잠바께서기 시디 비 동아기 내유 숨제 대한 비 차단 모성 그 샤원도 결정인게 아니 심진 디기다 닌지 율무멍 차고레스 현재 닌지 율무멍 채원디 라 다 텔야 닌지 기고르마도 샴바 닌지 계서스케요 마로스 다 텔야 닌지 기도바는 닌지레스 라 간지 닌지 삼바디요 바이나 닌지 삼바디요 바는 근데 소사 드브잔세 아니 세겐치니 베디 아니 쇼지기 베 아니 솔라보치 사르야티 야지야다마 디어서레스 베나 파워토메기 남테나 나중간주 파워토메기 지슨 장본 공부 드단치기요스라 디토가 상지 담는 베 one that inside something yours.
And the basis for that attitude is love and compassion to other sentient beings, right? So a practice is based on love and compassion, and the objects for developing love and compassion, which is to say the basis for developing love and compassion are other living beings, suffering sentient beings who are controlled by anger, attachment, and ignorance. These are the real objects that we use for developing love and compassion. So when we develop love and compassion, it's not that we focus on Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and we feel love and compassion to them. They are not the real objects of our love and compassion. The real objects are suffering sentient beings, those which are controlled by anger, attachment, and ignorance. So if we do have such attitudes of love and compassion, even for 1 second, we'll be able to accrue a powerful, very effective accumulation of the collections and to purify negativities and obscurations. And such things are demonstrated, for example, by the life story of the master Asanga and his teacher Maitreya, how in 1 instant, in 1 second, a great accumulation and purification has occurred due to the power of love and compassion.
다 로중이 사질이야. 다 파버 토메스라나 다 오늘 타내겠다. 남주 딘비 끼우지러 왔어. 아니 직철이야. 다 직대바다. 아니 직추그 장박이 아니 남주도 다 직시 먹어 와지러 왔어. 이나야 공기다 직 로중이래야 깔리잖니. 돈도주도 잠만 공부겠다. 직 샤마시비 갑들이야. 다 직 익슈 교진. 또 수만 참으로는데 다 직 키냠 타바 쇼시피겠다. 직 류체가 다 뮤스에게 드리지 세진다 디게 비게다 동아가 나서진 통원디게 싸우니는 마스버 친다 아니 다 디교역체도 기대 교고야 뭐 교고야 다 딘디기 답에 미스음네 비게다 직 비게든 물량가 좋은디 아니 마투와지 되니 지선 자몽고 문제야 다 제온디 땅에 깔리 드리게 로마모들이 제투마스라디 캐란 초사도 장게 아니 야마켜버렸어. 데리케랑 냠타비 키들이야. 오늘 수수비 가서다 지 러탄 비 샘참장장 토니 아니 디둥을 세야야. 아니 릉아 있음 처음 가래더니 걔는 조사들자. 아니 비다 용 강신이 아니 걔랑 나다 제 테레마동가 뒤균된 걔랑 틀리스. 딘디 남들 두zu 오늘 타네 샘라야 펜부슈 rongal ngaron dipe dingone tani ingire samsam jumadu tati khanda ina samsam kaukala ya namtar khashile tati khanda ina samsam konjo yungu dosra ina ya pava thome gi jidun chamo go muddan jase jadam ingire roji o disangu dosra.
So such stories, for example, of those events that occurred in the life of Asanga and how he was, first of all, trying to come to meet his master, Maitreya, for 12 years. So he heard about Maitreya and the teachings of Maitreya. He wanted to meet Maitreya in order to receive teachings from him. And for 12 years, he practiced the yoga of Maitreya in order to be able to come to be with Maitreya, to see Maitreya face to face. And he had, of course, a great faith in the Buddha Dharma. He was also kind of quite a learned person, he was a practitioner, and yet for 12 years he practiced without being able to see Maitreya. And it was at some point he became quite deflated, quite disappointed for having practiced for such a long time, 12 years, without being able to meet his master Maitreya. One day he was making his way along a road and he came across a sick dog. And part of the lower belly of that dog was completely infested by maggots. So Asanga saw that dog and he felt a great concern for the dog. He wanted to help the dog, but also he wanted to do it in order to save the dog, but also not to harm the maggots that were infesting, that infestation in the belly of the dog. So he leaned down, closed his eyes, because he found this kind of scenario to be quite full on. So he closed his eye and with his tongue was trying to remove those maggots, those worms. And he wasn't able to reach that dog. He opened his eyes and he saw Maitreya in front of him. And he told Maitreya, no, I was looking for you for 12 years. For 12 years, I was trying to come to see you face to face. Have you got no compassion or concern for me? Well, Maitreya said that he was all along with a Sangha, but a Sangha on account of not having collected the accumulations, not having amassed the collections, not having purified negativities and obscurations, was not able to see Maitreya. But once he developed the power of compassion, in that short, brief moment, he was able to accumulate this great accumulation of collections to purify negativities and obscurations, to be able to see Maitreya face to face. So this story, this account, illustrates the power of loving kindness, love and compassion. And this Geshe says that sometimes when you hear stories taken from the Buddhist tradition, you might wonder, is it really true? Has it really happened like that? But at least with the story about Asanga and Maitreya, Geshe has no qualm, no doubt that such thing is possible, that something that can actually occur. For someone to accumulate this great accumulation of collections to purify negativities and obscurations in such a brief period of time through the power of love and compassion.
파워토메게 다 주준 참번 공부 지원 다 주준 참번 공부 송나라야 저 가리얼스란디 취기 텐도 쏙동 와세지 취기 텐도 쏙당 터버지 거레스 디송여스더라 취기 텐도 쏙당 저디 다스직 비직 아니 소소쏙 아니 밤에 따인도 디리시고 말았어 취 변나 주준 멜라리비 남다 나라야 아니 직 코랑 길라마 딱 가송 그쳐도더니 아니 캄바직 서골야다 겨여비기 아니 남들이 요레스 디 카레스라만디 담가직 아니 슈야ချက်담가지 나로시스라만디 걔랑이 담가 만나고 걔랑이 쳐도 디치 거레스 아니 캄바 겨주네 캄바 겨야 겨주 마식 주야 겨 마식 원에 단 텐상 미도지 마나 살직 제바이나 다가라 다 아니 미코라마다는 로드야 잠도 시작하는데 이내야 디마나와 체제 아니 당 원행아 지 라마디기 당가는 남아있는 이 가르치고 존의 제삼성게 로다 장주치니 안도 스존디 아니 담가는 나니 안지 세지 루지리아 상기스 송여를 디텐데 용적으로 서로.
So Sangha, Arya Sangha received instructions, teachings from Maitreya. And one of the instructions that he gave for Maitreya was to practice the Dhamma, even in the course of one's life. Not to give up on one's Dhamma practice, even for the course of one's own life. So of course, when we think about it, it's not that we think about trivial situations and we give up our life for trivial situations. Such point is illustrated, for example, by the life story of Milarepa and Marpa, his teacher. So Milarepa was this great Tibetan yogi, and he relied upon his teacher, Marpa. In order to receive instructions from Marpa, Marpa, first of all, gave Milarepa certain tasks. He actually told him to build towers, to build a house, to build buildings 9 times over. So he told Milarepa to build a tower. Milarepa did that. And then Marpa looked at it and said that, no, that's not good. Take it down and build it again. So he did that 9 times over, and Milarepa did not give up. He did all of that in order to be able to receive instructions from his teacher. So in his mind, he had pure intention, pure appreciation of his teacher, Marpa. And he did all of that in order to receive instructions. And on that basis, he was able to attain a state of enlightenment in one short lifetime, in one body. So when we think about it, and we think of also our attitude with respect to that, had it happened to us, we would probably have given up after one time had it happened to us. And yet Milarepa did not. He had a pure intention, pure view of Marpa, and on that basis, he was able to attain the state of enlightenment in that lifetime.
직 추체니 니 추치기 나라직 쇼지 핑거문도로지 삼사코란 매주 작아도스 가스나 추구된도 속당 도와지 고레스 라운디다 안줄이야 직 자치슈디 속 들어왔어 봐 아니 뒤에 말이 아니 르 말이 직 아니 소수 깔레견 사자비 규벤주데 말이 자시슈도 쏘 들어왔어. 다 뒤땅도 가지고 거스라고 송고도 왔어. 지수 자문고 당 안주 디파샤는 뒤저 땅도 말이 류 땅도 말이 교 땅도 말이 다 딘지지기 아니 최냠내지 세 딘지지마도 매바이나 디 최기 만줄에서 팬도 용야지 마도비기 뭔가 기회담아서 난신기 아니 최기 아니 팬도 랍 전부 용야 되다 카부렌도 왔어. 이제 두스 시점는 들어봐나 안치 소수기 최냠내 가주 제도가 디 최기 아니 팬도지 소소의 연구여부 야시야단 말이었어. 안 세통부 제도바나 팬도 아니 카요라요 단단한 민통의 팬도딘지 또 용적으로 왔어.
So then Geshe said that when he thinks about it, at least with respect to his attitude, such thoughts that I've been practicing it and it doesn't give me benefit. I haven't found the benefits that I thought I would get from that practice. Such things do not occur to his mind because he doesn't understand that it all depends upon the attitude. As it is stated in the teachings of Maitreya, the attitude that you take, that you bring into your practice is that you should do it. Even if you have had to give up your own life, you will still continue with this practice. So our life is regarded as the thing that is most precious to us. What is most important, precious to us, is our own life. It's not the money that we have, the house that we have, or whatever possessions we have. The most important, the most precious thing to us is our own life. So the attitude that we bring into our practice, or that those masters brought into their practice, is they would do the practice even if they have to make such sacrifice. Even if they have to sacrifice their own life, they will still continue with the practice. So what is our attitude? It's hard for us to still develop, it is still hard for us to develop the same determination, to persist, to continue with the practice, even in the course of our life. Sometimes we still have that wish or idea that we can accomplish exactly what those great masters of the past have accomplished, but without having the same attitude of willing to make such sacrifices, even at the cost of our life, we'd be able to do it. So we sometimes think that I don't have enough time for doing that. I cannot make such sacrifice, my body or some wealth and so forth. So long as we're not able to develop that similar attitude, then it would not be like a correct intention or thought to think that we'd be able to accomplish and do what those great masters of the past have done. And if you are able to generate a similar attitude, which sees or values the importance of your Dharma practice, even insofar as you're willing to make such sacrifices in order to continue with your practice, then even in this life, if you have a longer life, Geshe reckons that you will start to see the benefits of your Dharma practice manifesting in this life.
Thank you.
So thank you. Shall we leave it here for today? 말에 치련제는 공부 이내 딜라 나서 시침부 로이어 하고마서 고소를 제거 정말 다가스티 베제티 나데기 팀이 그래. All right, let's do some dedication prayers. May the Supreme Jewel Bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, might quickly attain the state of the Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Sever of the snow-land teachings and transmigrated beings, makes extremely clear the path that is unification of emptiness and compassion. To the lotus holder Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And finally, to the Kyabje Lama Sober Bache. You uphold the subduer's moral ways, seven and bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Majuna's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplished magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, sever of myself and others, your disciples. Please, please live long.
Geshe, happy Father's Day from all your children.
Yeah. Yeah. Happy Father's Day. Yeah. 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 Yeah, this life he hasn't been able to be a real father, but so sorry for that. Is it today, Father's Day?
Yes, it is.
All right. Happy Father's Day. Sorry.